May 16th, 2008. That day, I woke up in my bed in my apartment and I went about my normal day. Grabbed a bite to eat, I cleaned myself up, got ready to head into work. I remember the ride to work. It was about 10 minutes long, from the south end of Grand Forks into downtown. I remember taking that 10 minutes and reflecting on where I was at in life, which on the outside seemed like a pretty good place. I was 29 years old. Certainly wasn't living in a mansion, but I had a nice apartment with nice things. I had a nice car. Most of my family lived close to me, and I was co-owner of a restaurant. My business had been open for just over 2 years. It was doing pretty well. I found a career that I really liked, and I was making more money than I ever had before. I was essentially setting my own schedule. Pretty good, right? I was deep in reflection on that drive to work because I had a lot to think about. I was reflecting because I knew that my life, as great as it was going to change drastically, and soon, because that day, I was taking a trip after work. May 17th, 2008, Saturday, one day later. That day, I woke up in a different bed than I did the day before. That day, I woke up in a bed in Project Turnabout, a treatment center in Granite Falls, Minnesota. Pretty significant change. I woke up that morning filled with fear, not knowing what was next. I knew that my life, as I knew it, was forever changed, but I didn't have any idea in what way. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here in a day filled with important conversations. It's an honor to be with you today. I'm so proud to be a part of this conversation. I'm proud of the work that the Office of Recovery Reinvented is doing. I'm proud of my recovery. I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of the fact that I'm wearing white jeans for 8 hours today and there's no stains on them so far. Small wins. I spent 30 days in that treatment center getting to the core of how and why I'd become an alcoholic, working to stay sober, and developing tools to improve my life and cope with adversity in better ways than I had before. It was the best decision of my life. It was the most pivotal time of my life, and looking back on it, it was the beginning of my journey of community involvement and a whole new personal philosophy on what matters. Like many others, I spent the first few days there believing that I didn't belong. I felt like I was surrounded by people that weren't like me. There was no way they could understand my situation. There's no way I could understand theirs. We came from different places, and we had different backgrounds. There was Cortland, a successful college lacrosse player from the East Coast who was dropped in the middle of the heartland in an effort to take him away from his surroundings. There was Walker, a young dad who didn't say more than 10 words his first few days there. There was Josh, a newly married guy, about my age, who had let drug addiction creep into his life and begin to deteriorate all aspects of it, including his marriage. There was my roommate, Mike, a middle-aged man from close to where I lived who had lost his marriage and his relationship with his children due to his addiction. There was Jim, a 60-something-year-old man who was attempting to get sober for the 18th time in his adult life. None of those men were like me, right? I didn't play lacrosse. I wasn't married at the time. I didn't have kids. I was still in my 20s. But it didn't take long for me to realize that I had way more in common with these people than I had differences. As we were put in situations where we began to talk to each other, we started to discover common traits among ourselves. We also started to discover common frustrations, worries, feelings, and sometimes even discovered eerily similar stories that we had shared. These bonds have stayed strong, and I still stay in touch with many of the people that I spent that time with. And those bonds that I developed are also the reason that I feel an immediate kinship with people that have been touched by this disease as soon as I meet them. People like all of you. So back to the time prior to me seeking help. It was over the previous few months before going to treatment that my alcoholism had really spiraled out of control. Like so many others that have been in that situation, I knew it. I tried to quit on my own, multiple times, unsuccessfully. I had become all of the things that I said I'd never become. A bad son, a bad friend, a bad coworker, a bad business partner. I'd become focused on vanity, on material things. I'd become a liar, a manipulator. I was angry, crabby, defensive, and standoffish. But there were people in my corner that kept telling me that even though I'd become all of those things, I was still a good person. And that kept me going through. It was while I was in treatment that I recognized that I'd spent a good portion of my adult life being a taker. Now, I don't mean physically taking things from people. I mean that I had just not really given back to those that meant the most to me. My relationships were that of convenience for me. They were one-sided, and they were unfair to the other person. I was taking, but I wasn't doing any giving. So it was while I was there that I made a commitment that I was going to, in some capacity, start giving. I didn't know how, when, or where, but I knew that it was time. As I moved forward in my journey, I recognized that there was a community that surrounded me and supported me when they certainly didn't need to. They lifted me up through difficult times, and they loved me when it wasn't easy. It's because of that that I made the conscious and sober decision to try to give back in meaningful ways whenever I could. I could not be on this stage sharing my story without a community. This is a community disease, and recovery must be a community effort. It's been no secret that the pandemic has caused significant mental health and addiction issues in this country and around the world. We became isolated. Overdoses skyrocketed. We were talking about it and we were all worrying about it immediately when the shutdowns and lockdowns started. And unfortunately, we were right. So now it's time to dig ourselves out of it. And we are going to all have to work harder than ever to make that happen. We are going to have to work together more than we ever have before. Those of us in the recovery community need support more than ever, and those people that are seeking solid recovery are going to need this community like we've never seen before. This seems daunting, right? It sort of has that same feeling of desperation that many of us felt when we knew we needed to get sober, but just didn't know where to get started. So what do we do about that? What do we do when something seems too grand or too daunting? We simplify it. We take it in small steps. So here's how I think about it. I am in recovery today, 13 years after entering treatment, because I had access to two things. The first one is love. Not everyone is so fortunate. So it's on us, all of us in this room, all of you watching from home. Hi, Mom and Dad, by the way, watching from home. To be a source of love for people struggling with addiction. It's on all of us to be that source of love. It's on us to serve as the family for those that need us to prop them up. And it's on us to show grace, to be empathetic, to give chances. People need to feel loved to be successful. The second thing that I had access to is resources. I was fortunate to be in a place where I could afford to go to treatment. I had health insurance to cover the bulk of my expenses. The bulk of the expenses. I had a job that was waiting for me when I got back. I didn't lose a paycheck when I was in treatment, which meant that I didn't fall behind on any other rent and bills. If any one of those things fell off the table, it's likely that I wouldn't have successfully completed treatment. I very much came from a place of privilege when it came time for me to get help. I recognize that. I've heard the First Lady talk a lot about how addiction is a highly inclusive disease, and she's right. It absolutely is. Addiction does not discriminate. But recovery isn't as inclusive as it needs to be. It should be, but it isn't yet. We have work to do. When I went to treatment, I had all the pieces in place to successfully complete a treatment cycle, and it was still hard. I was still on the verge of relapse multiple times. For our marginalized populations, they are at a significant disadvantage seeking recovery, and we all need to do better to help them. If we've heard it once, we've heard it a million times. That person knows they need help. Why don't they just go get it? Why don't they just go to treatment? So let's think about the potential barriers that prevent people from getting the help that they need and they deserve. There are hundreds of them, literally hundreds of them. And let's all work together to eliminate those barriers. Working to eliminate, yes. Working to eliminate barriers is how we will all make recovery as inclusive as addiction. I want you to think for a moment about the role that employers and workplaces can play in helping people to get treatment and also staying sober and in a meaningful recovery program after the initial treatment cycle. So if we think about the American construct of the traditional work day, work week, work structure, it's not uncommon for people to spend more time with their coworkers on any given day than they do their families, right? We wake up, we get ready, we leave the house, we head to work, we work 8 to 10 hours, and then we head home and spend 3 to 6 hours with our families. For those that don't have families to go home to, their coworkers may serve as their only human interaction in a given day. So knowing that, why haven't we focused more on training and equipping people in the workplace to look for warning signs of their coworkers' struggles, whether it be addiction or mental health challenges? Is it because employers feel like it's not their responsibility? Probably partially. Is it because it's just generally easier to not have those difficult conversations? Right now, yes. Is it because it's just a new concept? Commingling work and personal lives into one conversation? It shouldn't be, but it's the case. What if employers, large and small, took an active role and made a concerted effort to change the landscape of addiction and recovery in our country? Now, I want to be clear. There are some employers that are doing groundbreaking work in this space. And I'm not suggesting that this responsibility falls solely in the hands of employers. What I am saying is that in order for us to really move the needle towards eliminating the shame and stigma of addiction, every person, every organization, and every business needs to do better. And in order for us to do better, we need to think about changing the conversation at all times of the day, in all settings, and with all people. We can all do better, and maybe it doesn't have to be as heavy of a lift as you may think. So I'm going to give you an example of some steps that we've taken at my restaurants. We start with a simple step, and that's what we're doing here today. So we talk about it. We talk about it up front. We talk about it with new employees. We immediately share with our employees that if they need to get help, that we're here to support them without judgment. It's no secret that the food and beverage industry has issues with addiction. So we feel that it's critical that we let our employees know that they are safe to talk about their challenges. It's simply not enough to relay this message when employees want to talk about it. After all, they may never talk about it if they don't know that they're working in a place that supports them doing so. So after that, we start to look at barriers that prevent people from getting the help that they need. One of those is fear of losing their job, right? I've talked to a number of people that have said, I know I need help, I can't afford to lose my job. So simply, we tell them that they have a job waiting for them, no questions asked, when they return from treatment. It doesn't matter if they go to treatment for 30 days, 60 days, or 6 months, and it doesn't matter if they've been an employee for 1 month or 1 decade. Their job is waiting for them. You will not lose your job if you seek help. You will not get demoted if you seek help. You will return to the workplace and pick up right where you left off with support from us. So there are other employers too that say you have your job waiting for you when you get back. But another barrier, we've probably all heard it before, is people struggling to overcome financial hardship. They'll say, well, that's great that I have a job, but I can't afford to go 30 days without a paycheck. I can't afford to not pay my bills. I can't risk losing my apartment. So we pay them. We pay them their normal wage or salary while they're in treatment. We make sure that they know that they do not have to sacrifice their financial stability in order to get better. They don't have to use up their vacation or sick time to get help. Now, this may seem like it's a big expense, paying someone for a month or more when they're not working, but think about what you get in return as an employer. You get a loyal employee, you get a productive, healthy employee, but most importantly, you've made a difference, a significant difference in someone's life. After leaving treatment, never would I have imagined being on a stage like this someday. I remember early in my recovery listening to different speakers share their stories and connecting with bits and pieces here and there and holding on to those nuggets of hope wherever I could. Those stories and those people helped strengthen my recovery, and hearing stories and speakers like we've heard throughout the day today continue to do the same. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of talking about this and something that you all might face, and that's talking to your families about this. So I've got two little tidbits I want to share. When I first came out of treatment, it was many, many years before I shared with my grandmother, who's in her 90s, that I had sought help and was better. And I was fearful of that because of the fact that that generation viewed this disease differently. I was also fearful about the fact of my grandmother maybe viewing my mother as a failure when I knew that wasn't the case. So I didn't tell her. There was even news articles that came out that somehow she didn't read the newspaper that day. But a couple of years ago, there was a front page newspaper article that came out, so she saw that. And she asked my mother a simple question. She said, Janelle, is Jonathan in recovery? So we all took a deep breath. And my mother said, yes, he is. And after all of these years of anguish, my grandmother looked at my mother and said, well, good for him. That's great. I was fearful about telling her because I just didn't know how she would react. I wish I would have told her years ago. So that's that generation. I want to talk to you about a different generation. I mentioned I didn't have kids when I sought help. I've got 3 little girls now that are my reason for being. And they're 10, 8, and 6. And as I've gone and had the privilege of talking to people around the region about my story, I often ask the question, how come we don't talk to kids about this stuff at a younger age? Because inevitably, when you live in a house like mine, where we have one adult in recovery, but the other one is not, the question comes up with young, curious minds, how come mommy can have a glass of wine with dinner, but daddy can't, right? So we address that head on. We've been talking to our children about my recovery from the time that they were wee little children. I'll share a story. We were out to dinner, my wife and I and our 3 kids, last week, a couple weeks ago. My wife ordered a glass of wine with dinner. The server looked at me and said, "Sir, would you like a glass of wine?" Now, I mentioned that I have a 10, 8, and 6-year-old, and they're at different levels of understanding this. So immediately, my 6-year-old piped up and said, "No. My daddy cannot have wine because he likes it way too much." So 3 things happened out of that, though, right? 3 things happened. Number 1, we all got a good laugh at the table. That was the first thing. Number 2, that server thought about language that they use when asking people about the beverage that they would like, right? I bet you that server went to the next table and asked if they would like anything to drink versus if they would like a glass of wine. The third thing was the most amazing thing. My 10-year-old understands this stuff. She's really smart. And when we were tucking our kids in at bedtime that night, after this had happened, after Violet, my 6-year-old, had spoken up, we started to talk about it. You know who started to explain addiction and recovery to my 6-year-old? My 10-year-old. Not me, not my wife, my 10-year-old. So if we can talk to kids about this stuff and get them empowered in school to be standing up for people and understanding in recovery, because my kids aren't going to be with me the whole time, but they are going to have kids in their classes whose parents are struggling with addiction. We need to help empower our kids to understand this more at a young age. And by the way, I've been saying that for a couple of years, but now I heard Dr. Lee speak this morning, so now I can say that's backed by science. That's a part of my talk now, is I can say that that's backed by science. I want to thank the governor and the First Lady for providing a safe and meaningful platform to people to talk about this. This unique way of leading is making a difference. Last week, the First Lady and I attended an event together where we shared our stories. After that event, I was approached by someone who shared that they were struggling and seeking help. And that person sent me a message and shared with me today that they've now been in treatment for a week. Stories matter. Talking about this matters. Specifically, I want to thank the First Lady and all of the other people on stage today for their courage and willingness to be vulnerable. Doing so has empowered people like me and so many others to share their stories with pride and with hope for the future. Most importantly, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you for being here today to be a part of the conversation. I want to thank you for providing support to me and my brothers and sisters in recovery, and I want to leave you today with a challenge. Take what you've learned and apply it. Think about barriers and how you might help people overcome them. Start conversations about barriers in your workplace. That's where change can start. But most importantly, go out into the world with a sense of empathy and love. Build community and do it boldly, together. Thanks again for the opportunity to be with you today. Be well.